occasionally Greek, the Koine language that Jesus spoke. But they didn't speak Hebrew. And here Zephaniah says in chapter 3, verse 9, "For then I will turn to the people a pure language, that they may all call upon the name of the Lord, to serve him with one consent." The restoration of the pure language of Hebrew is a miracle, unprecedented in human history. No one is speaking ancient Latin as a living language today. No one is speaking ancient Greek or any of the other languages or ancient Egyptian. But the Jews in Israel, 6 million Israelis, are speaking the language of the tongue of the prophets. How did this come about? Early in the 1900s, a man by the name of Eleazar ben Yehuda, a Jew living in Palestine, woke one night with a dream that God said, "Restore unto my people a pure language." He began a laborious task and created a 14-volume dictionary of the Hebrew language. He took the biblical roots of about 7,000 words, biblical grammar, and then added new Hebrew words for fountain pen, machine gun, automobile, and fighter plane. Today, they speak the language of the prophets. What an astonishing fulfillment of prophecy. How unlikely, and yet it's happened in our lifetime. The next prophecy I would like to point to is King David. In Psalm 83, prophesied clearly that in the last days, when Israel came back in the land, that a group of nations would come against Israel, and this group of nations would confederate together with a plan to destroy Israel from being a nation. Now, of all the other nations in the world that are in conflict, if they lost a war, they might lose territory, they might lose cities, they might lose politically or economically or reparations. But no other nation in history, let alone Israel today, other than Israel, faces annihilation and genocide. Yet the Arab nations have said repeatedly, as have the Palestinians, that if they ever win a war against Israel, they will annihilate every single living Jew. This is something that God prophesied 3,000 years ago by King David. In Psalm 83, verse 2, "For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up their head. They've taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They've said, Come, let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent, and they are confederate against thee." In this prophecy, what we find is that David went on 3,000 years ago and named the alliance of the Arab nations against Israel. He says the tabernacles of Edom. Edom is the brother of Jacob and represents from Esau the area of Jordan today. He also continued and said the Ishmaelites of Moab and the Hagarenes. These include the peoples of Beirut, also Jordan and northern Saudi Arabia. Gebal and Ammon and Amalek, the Philistines and the inhabitants of Tyre, all the nations of Lebanon. Assur is joined with them. They have helped the children of Lot. Assur includes Syria, one of the most inveterate enemies of Israel, implacable in their hatred. The truth is, the prophecy has been fulfilled. They confederated against Israel. The Bible said that there would be a return of the Ethiopian Jews in the last days. Zephaniah 3, verse 10, tells us, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring my offering." What is the prophet saying 2,500 years ago? 3,000 years ago, King Solomon had a liaison with Queen of Sheba, Queen of Ethiopia. She was not adverse to marrying him, according to the Ethiopian Royal Chronicles. They had a son, Prince Menelik, who, when he was of his majority age, returned to Ethiopia. But according to the Ethiopian records, he took the true Ark of the Covenant, leaving a perfect replica in its stead. We know that the Ark of the Covenant disappears from the biblical narrative from that point on. The Ethiopians claim they've had the Ark of the Covenant. But it is significant that Jews from each of the 12 tribes went down with this royal son of King Solomon to Ethiopia. And now they have returned. In 1991, at the end of the Civil War, Israel sent in cargo planes and flew tens of thousands of black Jews of Ethiopia, Jews by their religion, back to Israel, where they have now integrated, learned Hebrew, and now have joined the army and part of the society. Isaiah 27:6 tells us that Israel will become fertile again. If you've ever seen pictures of Israel in 1900, it was a desolate desert, as is Jordan mostly today. But Israel has used the most agriculturally sophisticated techniques in history. According to the United Nations, they're the most sophisticated agricultural nation on the planet. They produce 90% of the citrus fruit that is consumed by 500 million Europeans. They are incredibly efficient in their irrigation, with a little thin hose, with a dropping down from a hole just where the plant is to avoid excess evaporation. The Bible tells us there'll be a rebuilt temple in the last days, one of the signs that has not yet been fulfilled, but we're watching the beginning. Isaiah chapter 2 verse 2 says, all the nations will send representatives up to Jerusalem, to the temple, in the last days. 2 Thessalonians 2:4 tells us Paul's words that the Antichrist will sit in the temple of God claiming to be God. That means there must be a rebuilt temple, as 40 other verses confirm. There hasn't been a temple for 2,000 years almost, but only last year, in January 2005, Israel reconvened the Sanhedrin with the sole purpose of choosing the rules, the location, the architecture, and the Passover rules involved in sacrifice of animals to be taken place in the temple service. Israel's getting ready to build the temple. It's going to take a miracle, but they're getting ready. The Roman Empire must be rebuilt according to the Bible. In Daniel chapter 2, 40 to 44, he's given a vision of the fourth great kingdom empire upon earth, the Roman Empire. But he sees it in its revived final state, with 10 toes representing 10 nations, partly strong, partly weak. The European Union now represents 25 nations, but those 25 nations are expanding. And already they're seen as very unwieldy with 25 nations. So there's a demand to create an inner core of 10 nations, 10 superstates, who will have a common foreign and defense policy, a common economic policy, and they are the beginning, I believe, of the fulfillment of the prophecy that is yet future. Nations come together first. Then the Antichrist rips up 3 of them by their roots that violate him, and then the other 7 bow down to him. First the 10 nations, then the Antichrist. Finally, there's a prophecy of the reviving of Babylon. In Isaiah 13, verse 1, 6, and 19, we're told that God calls out prophetically by the prophet Isaiah to Babylon and says that Isaiah is to prophesy unto them that Babylon, which was the great enemy of Israel, will be restored in the last days and will be destroyed at Armageddon at the great day of the Lord by fire from heaven like Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, this never happened before in history. In all of history, Babylon has been conquered, covered by the sands of the desert, but never destroyed by fire from heaven. Yet God has already laid in the fuel. I've seen pictures of Babylon. It is built on a lake of asphalt that is beneath the boiling sands, that in the summer, it literally melts up and bubbles up through the sand, the asphalt that is used for the brick walls of rebuilt Babylon. Saddam Hussein has spent $2.5 billion rebuilding Babylon. And even though Saddam is gone, Iraq is determined to make it the center of a great economic empire. With the restoration of Iraq, with the restoration of Iraq's oil production, when the insurgency is done, Iraq, Babylon, is going to become a major regional power in the Middle East. It's been a pleasure to share with you. God bless you. I trust you are as fascinated as I am with the fulfillment of these prophecies made thousands of years ago that are being fulfilled in our generation. Surely it is an exciting privilege to be living in the generation that will see the coming of the Son of Man. You know, a number of questions are asked by serious students of prophecy every time I teach these matters. These questions have come in over the years, and I hope these questions help throw additional light on this most important topic of the second coming of Jesus Christ. One of the questions I'm often asked is, what additional prophecies point to the return of Jesus Christ in our generation? Well, one of the prophecies that I find most fascinating is found in Revelation 14. Here we're told that God is going to allow the kings of the East, kings plural, to raise up an army of 200 million soldiers. Now, John is obviously in his language astonished at this, because the whole population of the known earth under the